Hello and welcome to DD India. I'm Akshay Dongre and you're watching our special program Voice of the Global South, a show that brings to you stories, news, achievements and concerns of a rising aspirational world. Our first story today takes you to Nigeria, where there has been a resurgence of deadly terror attacks. Already a country battered by years of terrorism by armed groups, this new wave is making things worse. But the menace of terrorism is not just limited to Nigeria, but is spilling over to a larger region in Africa. Kidnappings, trafficking, arms smuggling and drugs. Africa today is slowly receding into a modern-day pandemonium. And here is our report on this crisis.
Nigeria is gripped with an unprecedented wave of terror attacks. The common people are scared, dreading a deadly bombing at any moment. On June 29, the city of Goza saw a brutal and deadly coordinated attack which targeted a wedding, the victim's subsequent funeral and a hospital. The incident left at least 30 people dead and more than 100 injured. A curfew has been imposed by the military.
I personally lost 3 of my friends instantly there at that first blast. Thereon, afterwards, some people now started for the funeral of one of the 3 that I lost. At the funeral ground, another one also blasted. Afterwards, as the DG Sema said, because I spoke with him personally, he said they were preparing a rescue mission at the General Hospital Goza when another one blasted instantly in the hospital. And there was another one around the hospital, and there's other one in Hausari, making 5, confirmed 5.
Nigerian President Bola Tinubu condemned these attacks, calling them desperate acts of terror. International organizations and agencies are raising alarms about the situation in Nigeria that have left a trail of destruction in the region. According to the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, more than 8.3 million people in Nigeria, approximately 80% of whom are women and children, require urgent assistance. For more than a decade, civilians in Nigeria have faced multiple security threats and risk of atrocities as a result of attacks, kidnappings and extortion by various non-state armed groups such as Islamic State in West Africa and Boko Haram. But the problem of terrorism is not just limited to Nigeria. It is branching out and plaguing the entire African continent. Countries like the Central African Republic, Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, Northern Nigeria, the Sahel, Somalia and South Sudan are already rife with multiple conflicts aiding the growth of terrorist organizations. According to the Africa Terrorism Database, a total of 2,122 terrorist attacks were recorded from January 1, 2023 to September 30, 2023, resulting in the deaths of 12,092 people across the continent. Nigeria had the highest number of fatalities from terrorist attacks in Africa in 2021, with over 3,200 deaths, followed by Democratic Republic of Congo with 3,065 deaths, Somalia with 1,147, and Burkina Faso with 1,036. The menace of terrorism is stunting the growth of Africa, causing a range of problems. Kidnapping for ransom has increased as abductions of civilians, aid workers and foreigners have become a lucrative source of income. As of 2023, South Africa had the highest kidnapping rate among the African countries. It had 9.57 kidnappings out of 100,000 inhabitants. Benin reported the second highest kidnapping rate. Nigeria is also seeing resurgence in mass abductions. Over 600 people, including at least 300 school children, have been kidnapped since the end of February. Smuggling, drug trafficking, and human trafficking is also prevalent in the region. An estimated 6.4 million individuals are enslaved in sub-Saharan Africa, making up 12% of the global enslaved population. 7 million individuals are enslaved in all of Africa, making up 14% of the total global enslaved population. There are far-reaching socio-economic impacts as well. Frequent attacks have destroyed infrastructure, including roads, schools, and hospitals, hindering the process of regional development. Adding to the collapsing infrastructure is the issue of the millions displaced, straining local economies and resources.
It is believed that we cannot fight terrorism alone or while others are not participating. That is why the Commission proposed to the authority, through, of course, the Council of Ministers, that although countries might be under suspension, they should be allowed to take part in meetings relating to security as well as in sectoral meetings. So that is why we have invited all 15 member states to attend this important and crucial meeting.
All of this as governments struggle to maintain control in affected regions, leading to a loss of legitimacy and authority. The problems of the African continent has long been ignored, including its harrowing issue of terrorism. Without a multifaceted approach, the cycle of violence and instability will continue.
Turning now to Sudan, where nearly 20 million people, that is more than population of many countries, lack access to clean drinking water. Millions more face starvation. The situation is only getting worse because of the ongoing war. And there is no end in sight as far as the crisis that people are facing. Our correspondent Naba Mohideen reports from Port Sudan, which despite being a major gateway to the rest of the country, is facing its own water crisis.
Searching for water is a daily nightmare for thousands of residents here in Port Sudan. Mohammed Hussein fled the war in Khartoum a year ago, looking for a safer place to live. But even in Port Sudan, on the coast of the Red Sea, he is still struggling to find clean water every day.
We haven't had water in the pipes for a year now, and we have to buy the available water at very high prices every day. The authorities force us to pay a monthly bill for a service we never had. This situation is unbearable.
It costs $1 for every 2 gallons of drinking water. An average family needs about 6 gallons a day to live. The cost puts an extra strain on families here.
The ongoing war here has made a situation that was already bad much worse. The city's infrastructure is at breaking point, making poor sanitation and disease a mark of everyday life.
A recent report issued by the United Nations says that 17.3 million people in Sudan lack access to safe drinking water. It's a real challenge to Sudan's sanitation and health systems. Port Sudan is one of many cities hosting a large number of displaced people, and the pressure on its existing water systems is mounting. In conflict hotspots, the situation is much worse.
We buy water. It's expensive, bad and salty, but we don't have any other choice, especially during summer. We either drink this water or get sick, or we go thirsty.
The main water supply systems in cities like Khartoum, Madani and Al-Fashir have been hit by daily bombardments. Experts believe the further deterioration of water systems can only be prevented if the fighting ends soon. Naba Mohideen, reporting from Port Sudan in Sudan for DD India.
While some countries in Africa face a water crisis, Tanzania brings a story of hope. The East African nation reported increase in its fish exports, hitting a record high. Our correspondent Daniel Kijo brings you this report from Tanzania.
Tanzania's sea products export numbers have reached a record high, hitting a 41% increase in just 1 year. According to the Ministry of Fisheries, the country exported about 26,000 tons from April 2023 to around 41,000 tons in April this year. Sea products like frozen fish, fish fillets, shrimps, prawns and octopus are exported from Tanzania to countries like France, Germany, China and India, to name a few. For individuals like Paul Boguse, a fish exporter based in Dar es Salaam, this expansion has created more jobs and other business opportunities.
Apart from just having a fish processing company to import and export, we also created a logistics company for clearing and forwarding.
The Ministry of Livestock and Fisheries data reveals that Tanzania directly employs about 230,000 people. The government has worked to enhance infrastructure and investment into the sector, and the private sector is modernizing the industry, making it more efficient and environmentally sustainable.
We will increase investment in infrastructure that supports the fish sector for the production, processing, conservation of marine life, and the business of all sea products.
In Tanzania, seaweed cultivation has grown into a prominent sector within aquaculture. This sector stands as a major contributor to the nation's export revenues, supporting more than 25,000 cultivators. Moses Mshana, a manager at a seaweed exporting company, says they now want to satisfy markets in Asia and the Middle East.
Seaweed is a product loved by Indians, Chinese, and the Turkish. We already have inquiries from Turkey who want to know about seaweed. They want to test the quality and buy.
Despite this export increase, challenges such as illegal fishing, overfishing, and climate change remain, posing threats to the sustainability of the fisheries sector. With the construction of new fish processing plants, improvement in storage facilities, and the adoption of better fishing equipment, the men and women in the sector can not only continue to provide livelihoods, but learn better ways to carry out their activities while supplying the world the best sea product possible. Daniel Kijo in Dar es Salaam, reporting for DD India.
We will take a small break here and be back with more Global South stories on the other side. Keep watching. Welcome back. You're watching DD India and this is Voice of the Global South. Let's move on to our next stories. Now let's move on to Latin America, where the migration crisis is escalating rapidly. The continent is plunging deep into chaos that pervades its politics, economy, and society at large, triggering movement of people to the United States illegally. The Texas border has been seeing illegal influx of migrants from Mexico for decades, but in recent years, people not only from Latin America, but Africa, Asia, and Middle East are also hoping to enter America through the Mexican route. But why is there a crisis? Here is a report.
Men, women, and children cramped in makeshift tents. Families huddled together as the sweltering heat fills the air with a thick smell of unwashed bodies. Children play in the dirt as their parents queue for hours, hoping for food that is often not enough. This is not the Middle East of Myanmar. This is the US-Mexico border, where hundreds still await asylum in the land of the free. The crisis at the US-Mexico border has reached unprecedented levels. Over 200,000 migrants were apprehended in May alone. But these migrants hang in a limbo with a fear of deportation after US President Joe Biden's new restrictions.
Today I'm announcing actions to bar migrants who cross our southern border unlawfully from receiving asylum. Migrants will be restricted from receiving asylum at our southern border unless they seek it after entering through an established lawful process. And those who seek to come to the United States legally, for example, by making an appointment and coming to a port of entry, asylum will still be available to them, still available. But if an individual chooses not to use our legal pathways, if they choose to come without permission and against the law, they'll be restricted from receiving asylum and staying in the United States. This action will help us to gain control of our border, restore order into the process. This ban will remain in place until the number of people trying to enter illegally is reduced to a level that our system can effectively manage.
But where are these people coming from? A major part of the migrant population hails from various Latin American nations. But since 2023, there has also been influx of migrants from China, trying to reach the United States via the Mexican route. Up until a few years, citizens of Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras made up 85% of the migrants. But today, 54% of the migrants are Venezuelans. Other regions of origin include Central and South American countries like Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador, the Caribbean states like Cuba, Haiti, African countries like Ghana, Senegal, and Asian nations like China, Nepal, Bangladesh. These migrations stem out of a growing desperation of those fleeing violence, poverty, and political instability in their home countries. The continent faces severe socio-economic problems including a collapsing economy, high inflation rates, unstable governments, and gang violence and climate crisis. Venezuela has experienced one of the worst economic collapses in modern history. According to a study by the Universidad Católica André Bello, over 94% of Venezuelans live in poverty, while Mexico, around 41.9% of the population lives below the national poverty line, according to the World Bank. Honduras, Guatemala have some of the highest homicide rates in the world. In 2022, Salvador's homicide rate was 52 per 100,000 people. Drug cartels across countries contribute to widespread violence as well, with over 34,000 homicides recorded in 2019, the highest number in decades. Frequent hurricane, floods, droughts, and extreme climate patterns are also adding to a burgeoning crisis. The Latin American countries are living in a chaotic present and stare into a bleak future. They face multitudes of issues, leaving them with no other choice but to seek better opportunities in the United States, albeit illegally.
I've been in Argentina 10 years, and right now I have a dream. I want to live in America. For my family, for freedom, for a best life.
As the fight for US presidency intensifies, the issue of migration remains a major point of debate between the Democrats and the Republicans. But as people on top comfortably decide the fate of hundreds of thousands of migrants, several await a chance for a peaceful life without the fear of violence and starvation as they continue their struggle of the American dream.
Hurricane Beryl is wreaking havoc in the parts of the Caribbean and putting the role of climate change under the spotlight for the global south once again. Exceptionally high sea surface temperatures are seen as the key reason behind the powerful nature of Hurricane Beryl, which has claimed several lives and has left a trail of destruction. Here's a report.
A deadly trail of destruction after Hurricane Beryl devastated the Caribbean, killing at least 10 people, a number that could rise, especially in the Eastern Caribbean, as communications are restored on islands devastated by extensive flooding and powerful winds. Cuba, Jamaica, Grenada, Barbados, Mexico, and several other countries in the Caribbean suffered massive losses due to the hurricane. Beryl's rapid rise marks an unusually fierce and early start to this year's Atlantic hurricane season, the earliest Category 5 storm on record.
Those who have been here for years have already lived hurricanes and such. For us, this is not a surprise.
St. George, capital of Grenada, was filled with debris, vessels in disarray, and boats submerged in the aftermath of the hurricane. Numerous homes and businesses have suffered several structural damage. Roads are littered with debris, and power outages have left many residents without electricity. The Category 5 hurricane made landfall with ferocious winds and torrential rains, leaving a trail of destruction in its path. Grenadian government has called for international assistance to help with the recovery efforts as the islands begin the long process of rebuilding. Jamaica was thrashed with heavy winds and rain on July 3rd, killing at least one person after forging a destructive path over the island. The fishermen claim that such a destructive hurricane has never been seen before.
Yeah, and it developed so quick from a tropical depression, so fast. History, them say, yeah, history. And first time to develop in June, July. Yeah.
Similarly, Barbados, Cuba, Mexico are recovering from Hurricane Beryl, and residents and authorities were assessing the damage to the island after it made landfall. According to experts, global warming is the key reason behind the massive hurricane, which has not been seen before the season.
Yeah, so climate change is affecting hurricanes. It's a complicated story, though. So the first primary factor is that with a warming globe and warming sea surface temperatures, that sets the stage for stronger storms to develop. And we honestly have not seen any recorded storms perform such an intensification rate prior to September 1st in the history books. So for a storm to do this in late June is something we have not seen before.
The World Met Organization said Beryl, which had strengthened to a Category 5 storm, has set the tone for a very dangerous hurricane season.
The 2nd of July, we do not normally talk about Category 5 hurricanes in July. But unfortunately, Hurricane Beryl is now at Category 5 strength. That is the top level on the Saffir-Simpson scale. It developed very, very rapidly over the weekend. It started the weekend as a tropical storm. Within the space of 24 hours, it became a Category 4 storm, first ever in June.
Meanwhile, US President also spoke on the potential of destruction climate change poses to the world.
It's the earliest time ever a dangerous Category 5 hurricane has been recorded in American history. People impacted islands and communities are in our prayers, and we stand by to provide assistance to them. Ignoring climate change is deadly and dangerous and irresponsible. These climate-fueled extreme weather events don't just affect people's lives, they also cost money, they hurt the economy, and they have a significant negative psychological effect on people.
The recent extreme weather events happening around the world have blurred the lines between a natural disaster and a man-made one, with the fallout of climate change being more visible due to the adverse human intervention in impacting climate change. The road to recovery, however, are usually longer for the developing and underdeveloped nations of the global south that are left with no choice but to frequently divert all the resources towards restoration of their lives with an increasing frequency every year.
What if you're asked to repair the damages done by your affluential neighbor, who instead blames you and asks you to pay for the damages and the tools required for the repair work? What would we call it? Hypocrisy or injustice? But that is what exactly happening in today's fight against climate change. The developed world that used fossil fuels indiscriminately over the centuries to advance, triggering climate change, is now asking the developing countries to take onus of healing the climate, while refusing to share the technologies required for it or to pay for it. Here's a report on one of the biggest challenges that the Global South faces today in the fight against global warming.
Scorching heat waves in Europe, wildfires in America, devastating floods in India, Ecuador and Somalia. Countries across the world are witnessing extreme weather events, pointing to a worsening climate crisis. According to a report by the World Economic Forum in January 2024, climate change is projected to cause 14.5 million deaths by 2050, primarily due to floods, droughts, heat waves, tropical storms, wildfires and rising sea levels. But as the world grapples with the urgent need to combat climate change, businesses and governments are turning to green initiatives. These initiatives are part of a new buzz term called green capitalism. But what exactly is green capitalism? Green capitalism, or more formally, eco-capitalism, is an economic system that seeks to combine environmentalism and sustainability into the capitalist framework.
It aims to ensure that economic growth does not come at the expense of the planet. The concept gained traction with the publication of influential works like Paul Hawken's The Ecology of Commerce and the adoption of frameworks like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Over the years, the idea evolved that governments and corporations, mostly in the developed nations, pledging to reduce carbon emissions, adopt circular economy practices, and support biodiversity. Companies like Tesla, Patagonia, and Unilever have launched several projects that dabble into the concept of green capitalism. American company Tesla launched its line of electric vehicles with the motto of making sustainable transportation desirable and accessible. Another American clothing company is known for its commitment to environmental activism, using recycled materials and supporting conservation efforts. British company Unilever, with its sustainable living plan, promotes sustainable sourcing and reducing waste. But what has led to the idea of green capitalism? It emerged in the 1960s when calls for environmental action were heightened amidst a volatile state of the world. But who is accountable for this damage? According to World Inequality Database, the affluent countries of the global north are responsible for around half of all emissions since the Industrial Revolution. They produce a carbon footprint 100 times greater than that of the world's poor nations combined. The 2019 report, which documents climate change and the global inequality of carbon emissions from 1990 to 2020, points out that the top 10% of global emitters, which mostly includes advanced economies like Australia, Canada, the European Union, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, United States, and United Kingdom, were responsible for about 48% of global CO2 emissions, while the bottom 50 were responsible for almost 12% of all emissions. Even though it does not disregard the contributions of the global south to the climate crisis, there is evidently less of an equal share in fossil fuel use, including energy consumption. The south disproportionately bears the brunt of environmental degradation, facing severe impacts. Other factors such as rising poverty levels and overexploitation of natural resources and dynamic political environment also puts the global south countries at a disadvantage. In the contemporary economic scenario, without tight rules and regulations for controlling the players in the green capitalist economies, the concept of green capitalism becomes greenwashing. Environmental marketing firm TerraChoice defines greenwashing as the act of misleading consumers regarding the environmental practices of a company or the environmental benefits of a product or service. According to a 2020 study by the European Commission, 42% of green claims made by companies were found to be exaggerated, false, or deceptive. Thus, eco-capitalism seems a far-fetched dream for countries in the global south. The majorly West-supported action plan, by its very nature, prioritizes profit over the planet and ignores the socio-economic challenges of the global south. Countries of the global south, with India at the forefront, have been actively speaking up against this blueprint of mitigating the climate crisis, which holds both the north and the south with equal accountability.
Climate action, too, cannot continue to witness an evasion of historical responsibilities. The power of markets should not be utilized to steer food and energy from the needy to the wealthy. When reality departs from the rhetoric, we must have the courage to call it out. Without genuine solidarity, there can never be real trust. This is very much the sentiment of the global south.
The challenge still remains. Actors from the global south need more space to raise their voices. The fight against climate change is necessary, but right now the cost seems too heavy for a developing global south.
That's it in this edition of Voice of the Global South. For those on the go, you can get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on DD India mobile app. The application is available on both Android and iOS platforms. Scan the QR code on the screen to download now. You can also connect with us on Facebook, X and Instagram. Also check out our website ddindia.co.in. From my entire team here in New Delhi, goodbye and keep watching DD India.